Trek favorites. What are yours? Welcome to Trek Favorites. I'm Chuck Joyner, and this is the show where you get to hear from some of my Trek friends as well as my tech friends about their favorite episodes of Star Trek. This time, I am really excited to have Mr. Peter Cohen here to talk about one of the very first animated episode that's been picked on Trek Favorites. Peter, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chuck. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, I am too. I've been waiting for somebody to pick one of the animated series episodes and leave it to you. You pulled it out. So we're going to talk about Season 1, Episode 2, which is entitled Yesteryear of the animated series.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite. It's not just one of my favorite episodes of the animated series. It's one of my favorite Star Trek episodes ever. Now, I can't expect everybody to be as immersed in this stuff as you and I are, Chuck. So, the animated series is considered by some, like me, to be canonical, the fourth season of the original series that never happened. It came on in 1973. It only lasted for 2 seasons, but it introduced some really great stories to the Star Trek universe, written by really good writers, and of course, featured most of the original cast as well, doing voiceover work. And Yesteryear was very early in the show's run, as you point out. It's Season 1, Episode 2, but it's without question the best written episode of the animated series, and one of the best written episodes of Star Trek, the original Star Trek series and universe, completely. I just absolutely love it. One of the keys to that is that it was written by D.C. Fontana. She is absolutely a superlative writer of television stuff, but she'd been working with Gene Roddenberry for many years before Star Trek, and was given a great opportunity with Star Trek to write episodes like This Side of Paradise, Charlie X, and so on. So what makes Yesteryear in particular so fascinating, if you'll pardon the pun, is that it's about Spock. Specifically, it's about Spock's childhood, and how he had to go undergo a trial of through childhood on Vulcan, and what happened, and sort of his background. And it really kind of fleshed out some of the stuff that we'd thought about Spock, but hadn't really realized. And it also introduces a time travel paradox, because it reintroduces the Guardian of Forever. The time portal that's central to the plot of the City on the Edge of Forever episode, the one with what's her name there from Dynasty, Joan Collins. Anyway, a really interesting episode. You get to hear Mark Leonard's voice, the voice of Sarek again, and you also get to see Spock deal, and I'm not going to ruin it here, but deal with a conundrum involving a beloved pet. And it frames why Spock feels as strongly as he does as a Vulcan about using logic and emotional control as his baseline for living, as opposed to living an emotional life, which might have been an option to him in other ways. Being half human, being a hybrid, as it were. And it touches on all those things. It touches on issues of childhood alienation and how we feel about our parents, how our peers, what it's like to be bullied as a child, um, also on a very fundamental level, the meaning of life and death. I'm of the age where I saw this, not actually when it was originally broadcast, because I was only about 3 years old at the time, but I did catch it in reruns shortly thereafter. And I was probably only about 5, maybe 6 years old when I saw this episode. But you know what? This particular episode meant so much to me that when the animated series came out on DVD a few years ago, I ended up buying the box set just so I would have it for posterity's sake. It was that important to me. Ironically, you can watch it on YouTube now, the entire episode. But I wanted it for posterity's sake, and I wanted a legal copy too. So anyway, so that in short is what Yesteryear meant to me.
So you picked it apart real quick there in so many ways, the depth of this episode. And I know a lot of people gave not a lot of credit to the animated series, and yet if you pay a little bit of attention, you're right. The stories are great. The writing is great. The voiceovers, of course, are with the original cast. So you feel like it, and it is Star Trek. I take nothing away from that. The animation, maybe it did leave a little bit to be desired, but in some ways, I will trade that for the writing and the voices, because that's what carries the whole story through, without question. And this one too, I thought it was really interesting. There's a tie back, and forgive me, I don't remember the original series episode when I think Amanda says something about Spock's teddy bear, and McCoy lights up, a teddy bear. And, Spock has to say, on Vulcan that the teddy bears have like 4-inch fangs, which you finally get to see in this episode.
Yeah. Spock's pet Salat is the teddy bear to whom he's referring, and it's not much of a teddy bear, but even within that, it's kind of funny because looking at it and I guess sort of retconning it a bit, there's there's an ironic humor there that Spock is applying that makes you realize he's not always about logic and emotional control. He's just as good at irony and sarcasm as McCoy can be, but on a much more subtle level and a much deeper level. So it's a lot of fun to sort of backfill that stuff in after the fact and understand, hey, these writers really love these characters and wanted them to have an emotional and intellectual depth that maybe we didn't always see on screen. Because they couldn't always get it past the censors, or because the production company might have wanted something different. But you can see there's a lot of love there for the characters.
And given that it's animation, they can do so much more without having to worry about special effects, because it doesn't matter, because it's animation, it's all drawn. So whether you're drawing something, that is on the Enterprise or back on Vulcan, X number of years ago, it frees everything up. And I really love that part. And speaking of the teddy bear thing, at first you get the feeling that this is just like a big furry animal that follows Spock around. But then in the end, when it saves Spock's life, you find out, it really was kind of a beast, that in the most positive sense, and it was a good thing it was.
Absolutely. And as far as the animation is concerned, all right, the animated series won't win any modern awards for the quality of its animation, but at least the figures were realistic. And I mean, compared to Captain Caveman and Scooby-Doo, which is sort of state of the art at the time, it really isn't that bad. It's a fun sort of reference point to see how far we've actually gotten, especially with stuff like Japanese animation to sort of set the bar for what we sort of expect these days. At the time, the animated series was taking a lot of chances and was doing some really interesting stuff. Making very adult storylines for kids, because there was no doubt that it was pitched at kids. I remember buying the Ertl toys when I was a kid, right? There was all that stuff available, but in other respects, it was very sophisticated programming. And by the way, one thing I'll mention is that if you have seen the 2009 Star Trek movie, the J.J. Abrams reboot, there's a scene on Vulcan where young Spock, is being bullied by 3 Vulcan students at the academy. And they're really mistreating him and treating him poorly. That actually is a call out to this episode. There is no question in my mind that Abrams or whoever wrote that particular scene pulled this straight from Yesteryear, because that is very much a part of this little 24-minute and whatever second animated piece. So it's like I said, it's neat on multiple levels.
Yeah, and I should have said up front, we don't worry too much about spoiling something like this old. If we were doing Discovery episodes, yeah, maybe, but this has been around for a long time, and so, folks, you can find it. Peter mentioned that this is available on YouTube. This episode, you can go find it there. You can read the summary on Memory Alpha, and I'll have links in the show notes, or just go find out where else it's streaming and watch it. But Peter, you touched on the bullying part, which seems to be very timely. But now, after all these years, it's still timely.
Unfortunately, yeah, we really haven't moved the needle that much in 46 years.
Yeah, and there are times I wonder if that's just maybe not human nature at that stage of social development. I'd like to believe it's not, but you have to wonder.
Yeah, well, I thought it was very interesting for DC Fontana to make that part of the storyline, because again, we know from the original series that Vulcans are all about logic and emotional control, but seeing how the kids don't have to obey the same rules as the grown-ups, and seeing how really cruel and nasty they can be to one another, is a good reminder that, hey, we don't live in a perfect world. This is as much Spock's harsh reality as it is our own. Having to grow up with people who dislike him for being different, and for not being just like them. And when you're like a 5 or 6 year old who loves science fiction, but doesn't really care for sports too much, or doesn't really, like to do some of the same outdoor stuff that maybe some of the kids in his neighborhood does. Personally, for me, it was a powerful and resounding message to know that this figure on TV who I looked up to. I mean, I had like Spock pajamas. I didn't have any kind of emotional control like Spock did, but still, I loved the character, and he was just so cool. It was a very powerful message for me, to hear that Spock had to deal with this crap too, kid. You're not alone.
Peter, that's sort of one of the reasons I think I started this show, is that in the tech community, Star Trek comes up constantly. Star Wars, everybody's a Star Wars fan, right? But Star Trek seems to have resonated at a much deeper level with so many of us. And it didn't matter whether you watched it as first run or reruns or even rewatching it now. It still hits a lot of different touch points, different episodes, different touch points. And what you're saying is exactly one of the reasons that I wanted to do this show, is to talk about some of those and why and what impact it had on your life.
I think that for me, anyway, Star Trek was my first fandom. Fandoms pop up all the time now about everything. You got your Dragon Ball Z fans, and your Tesla fans, and your Harley Davidson fans, and stuff like that, right? But for me, anyway, Trek was my first fandom. I belonged to the Boston Star Trek Association when it existed. I was a card-carrying member. I worked early cons, when they were doing conventions in the Boston area. So Star Trek was so meaningful to me. And it brought people into my life that I never would have known otherwise. Writers, science fiction writers, artists, illustration artists who are still doing this work today, other people who I developed a real strong emotional connection with that I never would have had access to otherwise. So, as you know, I was not. Canonically, I was not first generation Star Trek fan because I wasn't even born in '67, right? I wouldn't be born until a few years later. But it became in its reruns and reworking so meaningful to me that it was a cultural touchstone that I could share with people. And, you know, sure, it might have identified me as a nerd. It might have identified me as, you know, sort of a fringe outlier. Yeah, you don't care about the Red Sox, kid, but you care about Star Trek. All right, you know, guilty as charged. But in the same token, it was a great bonding experience. And to your point, Chuck, I think that one of the things that's always separated Star Trek from other fandoms is in the quality of the writing. I mean, you had writers like DC Fontana writing Yesteryear and other episodes of Star Trek. You had Harlan Ellison, who, you know, as a professional writer, I worship the ground that Harlan Ellison walked on. I think that, you know, the work that he did was superlative. And I just, you know, it became sort of a model on a few different levels. And look, some of it has not aged well, right? The special effects on the original series were kind of craptastic, although I got to say the remastered stuff looks amazing. You know, but and let's face it, you know, the acting from some people, Shatner, might not have really been, you know, Emmy Award winning work, but you know, it was the stories, with some notable exceptions, always were very gripping, detailed, interesting character studies, touching on important themes, important societal themes at the time. Just the fact that they had a multiracial cast on the bridge was groundbreaking. You know, when Shatner kisses, I mean, when Kirk kisses Uhura in what was that? Who Mourns for Adonis? Was it? That was groundbreaking. You know, that was the first interracial kiss on television. It was amazing. You know, Nichelle Nichols has told the story about how she was ready to give it up after the first season, and no one less than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. convinced her that she needed to stay on, simply as a role model for African American children. You know, this is what you can aspire to become. This is what the future holds. And you know what? That people have knocked Roddenberry's vision of a utopian future, free of poverty, free of hunger, free of racism, free of capitalism, for that matter, as the fantasy of, you know, just some kind of like crazy communist socialist fantasy. Look, we have to aspire to utopian visions of the future, because the alternative is that we either aspire to the status quo, which means no progress for anyone, or even worse, we aspire to a dystopian future like we saw in The Matrix, or The Walking Dead, or countless other Blade Runner, you know, countless other examples of where technology has done us wrong, or human society has just run into the ground. And you know what? I don't want to live. I live that reality from day to day. I want a future that that speaks to our potential as human beings and what we can actually do. And in many ways, you know, that replaced faith for me, because I wasn't raised in a religious household. I didn't really grab on to any particular faith, although, you know, this bit of that, you know, kind of forms as a sort of fabric or network of spirituality that's important. But the idea that we were going to be living in a better future today with this cool technology, where we didn't have the same hangups that we did today, and everybody was able to eat, and everybody was able to work and feel productive and be a great, you know, productive member of humanity, remains today such a compelling thesis for a series. And I hope that Star Trek never loses that perspective. You know, and I want to see conflict. I want to see, you know, sure, I want to see phasers firing, and I want to see combat and stuff like that. DS9 is my particular, like, I can go on for days about how much I love Deep Space Nine, but that hopeful aspect that underlied Roddenberry's basic thesis for how Star Trek should be was always the thing that's drawn me to it and made it so important for me.
So much that is so well said. I don't even need to react to it because it goes without saying in so many ways. And to bring it back to the animated series and your comment earlier about this being sort of the next season after the cancellation, there's so many storylines here. It would have been interesting to see them do some of those things in live. I mean, this could have easily, well, relatively easily, maybe without the somewhat, been shot as a live show, but they didn't have that opportunity, so this stuff translated over to the animated series, and it just plays so well. And the fact that we're even here talking about it now, Trek fans are not. If you're not a Trek fan, you really need to go and look at something like this and step back for a minute and don't get sucked in by the dated animation or anything, but look at the story, look at the messages that are being delivered. I find it's kind of staggering that I can still enjoy this stuff after this much time. And I'm talking about from the original series, the animated series, the whole way up to, the new episodes of Discovery. I mean, they all have some similarities. Yes, some are darker, some are lighter, some are more hopeful, some are a bit more hopeless, but it's all part of the story. It's all part of getting there to where hopefully we will all eventually get.
Absolutely. Like I said, as long as the stuff that's produced under the Star Trek banner ultimately has that hopeful aspect, I'm confident that that the series will remain as important and meaningful for people going forward as it has to the generations of fans that come before them.
Yeah. One thing I did want to definitely talk about with this episode, though, and you alluded to it early, is the time travel paradoxes. We saw a couple of those, and it was for obvious reasons of timing, if nothing else. It had to happen a little bit quicker here. But we had to go back that, okay, Spock went back and, tried to fix it, and it didn't quite fix the first time. And so got to go back again and do it. And that, too, and at the very end, I felt like that was a kind of an open-ended thing that, yeah, there was one difference. A pet died. And so will that ever be followed up on at some point?
Yeah, and the great thing about time travel is that it's a MacGuffin, right? So scriptwriters can sort of use it however they want to because the rules about time travel are kind of pliant depending on how convoluted you want to get. Sometimes they try to apply a logical consistency. Sometimes they can just say, "Hey, quantum mechanics, things are weird when you start messing with the time stream." No one really knows how that stuff would work, if it can work at all, within the framework of physics as we understand it now. So it becomes an easy MacGuffin, but it's also very useful too, to give us these tools to sort of explore ideas that we might not be able to work with otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. But it's still fun. It's fun to play with, and it makes for great entertainment and for great storytelling.
Absolutely. So, and it's always neat seeing the Guardian of Forever because, the Guardian of Forever is cool.
The Guardian of Forever is very cool, and it's probably the most dangerous thing in the Star Trek universe.
Well, that's why the Federation guards it so intently, right? They can't let that fall into somebody else's hands.
Yeah, I'm not even sure you want it to fall into Federation hands. I mean, because one little mistake and everything changes.
Yeah, well, you get, McCoy all hopped up, and then all of a sudden, the 21st century never happens, right? It's some dangerous stuff, man.
It is. Peter, thank you so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun, and thank you for sharing what this episode meant to you. I think it's always intriguing. The fact that you say that you love DS9, you could go on for days, but you picked this one says volumes about why this was so important.
Absolutely, yeah, no question. Yeah. DS9, like I said, I could go on for days, but I knew that we were stuck in about 30 minutes, so I didn't want to. I didn't want to open that Pandora's box.
Well, come back another time. We'll do a DS9 episode.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
All right. Where can folks find you when you're not watching Star Trek or here talking Star Trek? What are you up to?
Best places to find me are on Twitter. My handle is Flarg, Flargh. Encourage follows. My DMs are open if you have any questions or comments. And I'm also the newly appointed managing editor of iDownloadBlog.com. So come on over, check out our content. And if you have any questions, feel free to fire me an email at peter@iDownloadBlog.com.
Great. Well, you definitely have to have you back on the other show, Mac Voices, to talk about that. But in the meantime, congratulations on the new gig. I'll be watching.
Thank you very much.
We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Trek Favorites. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have thoughts on this particular episode or Star Trek in general, please drop me an email, chuck@trekfavorites.com. Post something to our Facebook page. Let us hear from you. And of course, for the audio listeners out there, you can see the video version of this on our YouTube channel and on our website, TrekFavorites.com. Thanks for watching. Visit TrekFavorites.com to access all our shows, watch the video versions on our YouTube channel, and connect with us on Twitter and Facebook as @TrekFavorites.